What is going on, investors? Hopefully you guys had a great day out there. Time to talk about Snap Incorporated, ticker symbol SNAP, otherwise known as Snapchat. And I tell you what, tomorrow's Friday. It's already a great day. If you own shares of Snapchat, it's probably going to even be a better day if this after hours earned holds. We're up $10 per share in the after hours. That's over 16%. You better believe that blew us all the way up into the upper ends of from a technical perspective on Snapchat. We'll talk about it. Are all the big gains over? What from a technical perspective? Is that it for Snapchat? Did we miss the train? Did we miss the boat? We'll talk about that here in a second. Now, the other thing we're going to talk about on today's show are the earnings. We're going to take a look at these numbers. What has this stock up so big in the after hours? We're going to take a look at it from a quarterly basis and a 6-month basis as well. We're going to primarily focus on revenue and profit because when you look at cash flows and you look at balance sheet, I'll explain this in a second, don't really tell you a lot about Snapchat. Now, what Snapchat earnings is going to tell you a lot about is what the heck's going to happen with Facebook and Google when they report their earnings in the next 2 weeks. Look at Facebook in the after hours, up 2.6%. That is $9. That is because people are connecting these dots. They're looking at the results Snap just printed. They're looking at the results Twitter just printed. We posted a video about them shortly, not that long ago. So you better believe that if the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth place player in online advertising from a social media perspective is absolutely crushing it, guess who's probably crushing it as much or more? Yeah, you guessed it, probably Facebook. Now, in terms of what I wanted to do was compare these companies just very quickly. I just want to get our heads around this, okay? Before we're going to jump into the numbers here in a moment, but I want to talk about from a price to sales basis. So this is the price you're paying for every dollar in sales that these companies have. Now, I know all these companies are different, but for the most part, a sale is a sale at Facebook, a little bit less with Google. They're a little bit, not a little bit more diversified, but slightly more diversified than the other ones. But for the most part, they all make money by people clicking and looking at ads. We see Facebook's actually only, and I say only, trading about 10 times sales. Google's even less at 8.8 times sales. Twitter's sitting right about 14 times sales. Pinterest, 23 times sales. We see Snapchat, you're really paying up for this one at 33 times sales. So they better be growing those sales at a very, very fast clip to justify that. Because in my opinion, I'd rather invest in gold medal winning stocks, that is Facebook and Google, before I pay up for someone destined. I mean, Snapchat, I think we can all agree on today's video, these guys are destined for a bronze medal at best in online advertising. Google and Facebook, unless they get broken up by the government, which I guess is possible, these two companies are going to be dominant over someone like a Snapchat. So they better be growing these revenues very, very quickly since you are paying a hefty premium versus the market leaders. Now, as we see here for the last 3 months ended here on Snaps, this is their most recent release on a quarterly basis. We're seeing came in at $454 million. That was last year. This year, hello, $982 million, just short of $1 billion here over at Snapchat. Now, for the last 6 months, we see a similar trend, almost a doubling of the revenue. So this is a company that is doubling that top line. Facebook, obviously not necessarily doing that, but much, much bigger company. Facebook probably does $1 billion in a day, and Snapchat does that in an entire quarter. So we've got other costs, though, going on with Snapchat, and we see here they have grown, and they have grown across the board. Notice we bolted on, I'll call that a little over $530 million on the top line, but unfortunately, our total costs and expenses, that grew by about $400 million as well. So you better believe our operating loss, while it improved, we lost $310 million off just $454 million in revenue. So you made $454 million in revenue, but you lost almost the exact same amount at $310 million. That has improved. Okay, we went from 982 on the revenue side. We lost $192 million. This is one of the reasons why I favor a Facebook, I favor a Google. We have much, much, much more beneficial terms in terms of the financials on those companies. Now, look, I have been wrong from a stock price appreciation. This thing's gone from like $10 per share all the way up to where we're sitting at about $73 per share. Look, over the last year, this thing's up 156%. So not at all am I saying you cannot make money in stocks like this, but just from a financial perspective, this doesn't paint that great of a picture. Although what it is painting is that Snapchat is probably just a couple quarters away from a tipping point, okay? They peeled off about $100 million on this operating loss. If they continue on that trajectory, doubling this revenue or close to doubling this revenue, well, look, in about a year's time, they should be able to be almost a break-even company, if not slightly profitable. So we'll see what happens from that perspective. Now, one of the reasons why I kind of zoomed through this is when you take a look at cash flows, companies like this get to add back in massive amounts of stock-based compensation. I mean, we're talking about $256 million over the last 3 months and nearly $500 million worth of stock-based compensation over at Snap. They get to add that back in on cash flows. So it gives them positive cash flows for the last 6 months. That makes no sense to me. Okay, from an accounting perspective, this is how it's done. I am just telling you as an investor, I would not analyze the company in this sense. It just doesn't make any sense. The rest of the cash flows look relatively benign to me. Now, from a balance sheet perspective, the other reason why we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here is take a look. Total liabilities are sitting at $3.9 billion. Now, that has ticked up a little bit over the previous period, but we're sitting at $3.9 billion total liabilities, every liability that the company possibly has. We're just talking about current assets, which is a very much almost all cash. We're sitting at $4.3 billion. So just in current assets, this company could wipe out every liability it has. So from a balance sheet perspective, is absolutely phenomenal. From a revenue growth perspective, absolutely phenomenal, or at least in the case of Snapchat. Now, I think now you might ask yourself, well, what the heck are investors paying attention to? Why is this stock up huge? I mean, we're talking about like 14, 15% here in the after hour trade. I think people are looking at this. Okay, daily active users, which is DAUs, we're $293 million in Q2. That's an increase of 55 million or 23% year over year growth. When you look at Facebook, which we talked about here a moment ago, again, this stock is going to be rocketing up tomorrow as well if these after hour gains hold. You look at a company like that, they are almost contracting here in North America. They're almost like losing users, where a company like Snapchat is still growing at a 23% clip. And this is including the fact that young people that tend to gravitate to sites like Snapchat, they're incredibly fickle. They're onto TikTok, and I guarantee you there's probably 2 or 3 other social networks sites that I'm probably too old to understand or use that they are using these days. So the fact that Snapchat is still holding in there and growing rather rapidly, very, very nice. And I think investors are rewarding the stock for that. Look, this stock has been on a monster move over the last year or 2 years, and we reached a critical level. In fact, what we're seeing here is evidence of this technical perspective. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the candle here, but before today's trade, we were sitting somewhere down here with Snapchat, right around $65, $66 per share. In fact, about $63 per share at the close of trading today. That we were sitting down here. Now we've gapped all the way up here. I'll even put a line in up here. It's about where we're trading at right now. I'll actually do it a little bit better. It's really this horizontal line right here, right at $73 per share. Now I put it in here because it marked, I believe these are all-time highs with Snapchat. And so we gapped up into all-time highs. Now, 2 things happen when you get to all-time highs. The very first thing that could happen is you get rejected and you come all the way back down here, possibly retesting this trend line. In fact, if this stock gets rejected, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if we come back in down here and retest this trend line. That would be somewhere in this $63, $64, $65 per share, really filling this gap, okay? Because we've gapped from 63 up to 73, at least in the after hours. Wouldn't surprise me if this one wanted to walk it down. That's exactly what happened back here. This stock rallied hard, got all the way up to 73. For whatever reason, sellers step in when this stock gets to 73, and it sold all the way off down to about $50 per share, had a little bit of half-hearted rally, came back down, rallied back up, close to 73, but not quite, got rejected again. And now here we are at 73. Now, the other scenario is that we get above this 73 level. Imagine that red line as a candle. And what traders would be looking for is a confirmation of that. So not just one candle here, but a second one above that. Now would show that sellers have really dried up and buyers have stepped in, and this thing could be off to the races. I tell you what, you look at a chart like Facebook, and especially Google is probably even better example. When you break to all-time highs, this thing could just keep running and running and running and running. Now, I think what could come under a little bit of scrutiny is the fact that if Snapchat's stock price continues to appreciate, well, certainly its outvaluation in comparison to its peers like a Facebook, Google, Twitter, Pinterest would become even more out of whack, at least from a price to sales basis. And you can't analyze Snapchat from a price to earnings basis, because I just showed you they don't make any money. So I see two scenarios with Snapchat probably, I would guess, actually playing out over the next 3 or 4 trading days. This one is either going to get rejected here at 73 and probably fill this gap and come all, depending on the velocity of it coming back down. I think we retest this trend line. And I want to tell you, if you retest this trend line with Snapchat, it's no big deal. Okay, this trend is still intact. Even if you come all the way back up here and retest it, and this trend line's not drawn in here perfectly, you could probably drop this down. You could probably drop this all the way down to here. It wouldn't matter as long as you don't take out this low right here at 58. We'll call that 58.90, 58.50 or so. You wouldn't want to see Snapchat get below $58 per share. You get below $58 per share, it will in some cases, and from a technical perspective, say that the uptrend is over and we are starting to break down and starting to make lower lows. So we'll see what happens with Snapchat. I think one or two things happen. This thing comes back and retests a trend line somewhere in the, basically fills this gap back to $63 per share, or this thing keeps moving up above this. And, again, look at Google stock chart. Only anybody knows when that train can stop. And so here's one of those scenarios. We've talked about it a lot here on the channel. Momentum is a big thing, and you can play these. I wouldn't play this as a buy and hold investment. In fact, I wouldn't play Snapchat or Twitter or Pinterest. The only buy and hold investments in this sector, in my opinion, are Google and Facebook. They are going to win the gold medal. And so I want to invest in gold medal winning athletes. I don't want to invest in bronze and silver. I'll let other people do that. But you certainly can trade this, and you could make lots of money if the momentum stays in the direction of Snapchat. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. And if you own Snapchat shares, tell you what, I'd take the day off tomorrow, go hit the golf course, and maybe sit by the pool and sip margaritas the rest of the day, because it was a fantastic day, especially if this post-market action holds into tomorrow. Hopefully you guys have a great day out there. We'll be back again soon. Good luck with your investments.